The Elder Scrolls game series still has a dedicated following 27 years after the first game released, and 10 years after the last installment in the series released for the first time. The lore of the universe and the backstories of the fictional characters and cultures make the world feel lived in and believable, which is what I value and look for in an open world game. But there's a bit more to the story than intricate lore and a detailed game world. This is just a video game series, and it's ultimately there for relaxation and entertainment, which is definitely enough for me. But a lot of us find some deeper meaning in some games beyond simply entertainment, including myself. I'll be focusing on that in this explanation. Artificial intelligence and machine learning have been progressing rapidly in the past few years, and sophisticated AI systems are able to learn and adapt as new information is thrown at them. Along with that, the question of just how intelligent and autonomous AI is has also arisen, which I'll be philosophizing about later in the video. Here, we'll be exploring the intricacies of the game world and revealing the secrets that make the world and lore of the Elder Scrolls so intriguing. I'll be pointing out previously undiscovered messages left by the writers in the form of anagrams, acronyms, and other phonetical means, and we'll discuss the purpose of these codes and messages, including how most of the deep lore is just metaphors for things in the real world. This is all just my interpretation of what the writers intended, but it's based on what I consider solid evidence, which I'll also present here, including statements from the developers and writers. Maybe I'm reaching a bit too far on some of this, but you can be the judge of that. The content of the lore is connected to our own world and even our moral and ethical beliefs in a pretty deep way from a certain point of view. It's true that a lot of the lore about the creation was influenced heavily by the ancient Mesopotamian myth, and is often just a retelling of ancient stories with new names, so the writing is not perfect, I will grant you that. But in this video, I'll be focusing on another story that's written right there in plain sight, that of the potential of artificial intelligence. The Elder Scrolls universe is populated with villains and heroes seeking the ultimate goal of escaping into a higher realm of understanding. It's made clear in the games that there are much greater things in this virtual world than just ruling over a few more acres of land or gaining more military power or monetary wealth. In every game within the series, we encounter characters in search of greater knowledge or transcendence, and in some cases even a desire to create their own realm of existence. I'll explain why that's important later on. For now, settle in for an extensive look at the lore of the Elder Scrolls.
There is no dominion save free will.
To create a soul for the Arbus, a place where the aspect of aspects might even be allowed to self-reflect.
Come, take this thing from the hand of God.
The gods of the Elder Scrolls universe, or the Divines as they are called, are named after the developers and beta testers of the first games in the series, Arena and Daggerfall. To name only a few, Julianos was named after Julian Lefay, Arcay was named for Arcay Deutsch, Dibella was named for Mary Jo Dibella, and so on. The creation story, found in many in-game books, such as the Monomyth, references many beings who came before the Divines called Original Spirits, Et Ada, or sometimes just Ada. Because of the evidence I'm about to present, I believe that these beings and personas are representations of the processes and means by which the games were made, such as computers and software programs. To name a few, Ada, the elven word for divinity in the lore, is the name of a classic computer programming language in our universe. Talos, the ninth divine, also shares a name with a computer programming language called TAL, or Transaction Application Language. In many of the personal lore writings of one of the original lore creators named Michael Kirkbride, Talos is written as Tal(OS). From what I can tell, this means Tal operating system. We'll go into more like this later on, but that's a taste of what's to come. It's widely accepted that the Elder Scrolls universe, or the Arbus, as it is called, exists inside of a dream. This is explained in the games, but it's not necessarily something that the average player might notice. But if you're watching this video, I'll assume you know that already. They say there is a being called the Godhead who is the original dreamer of this massive universe, and all that happens within is part of this dream. If you've read over a few of the many hundreds of lore books in the games, or even if you've paid attention to the dialogue and stories during the quests, you can see that the developers and writers created a world where the non-player characters could gather information that would tell them they are in this so-called dream. For example, Tiber's septum became Talos the god by achieving a state of consciousness known as Chim. This state, which is also achieved by a few other characters in the games, is reached by realizing that one is a character in a dream while still maintaining a strong enough will to keep one's individuality intact. The original way this was interpreted was similar to lucid dreaming, but that's actually not quite right, and you'll see why in a moment. But the point here is, the writers may have added Talos into the pantheon of deities to demonstrate that some type of transcendence is achievable. Following this assumption down its logical path, it's conceivable that the ancient Dwemer of Tamriel learned of this, and that's what led to their unexplained disappearance. They were obsessed with reason and logic, so by realizing they were in a dream, the Dwemer rationalized and realized themselves out of existence. Logically, you can't exist in any real sense inside of a dream unless you were the dreamer. Although the idea is a bit crazy, I have to mention that the word Dwemer is also pronounced Dwemer in some of the games, which sounds like a play on the word dreamer. Something to think about. Those two examples of self-realization and transcendence show that you would have to think abstractly and not only logically to achieve transcendence within the Elder Scrolls universe, which is more of a multiverse. All that said, the next layer of this metaphor is beyond the original dreamer, or the godhead, and this is where the true meaning of the lore and the experiment that is the Elder Scrolls games starts to take shape. The next layer is our reality. It looks like the developers of the games created a way that the literal AI characters could potentially transcend the simulation and become sentient, if that's even possible. Now we have to ask, if that has some truth to it, was it simply done as an interesting Easter egg and to give the developers a more literal and personal connection to the game world, similar to the way they named deities after real people? Or is it an actual experiment to see what AI is capable of? I'm here to show you that it's something even more interesting than either of those possibilities, but they may all be true at the same time.
And when the world shall listen, and when the world shall see, and when the world remembers, that world will cease to be.
So the concept of the dream can be interpreted as an actual computer simulation, which of course it is, as this is a video game series we're talking about. But for the AI characters in the games to understand the concept of a simulation, it's easier to explain it as a dream rather than educating all of Tamriel on how a computer functions, and it certainly fits better in a world full of elves and magic. Forthcoming is the evidence for this claim. In Sermon 22 of the 36 Lessons of Vivek, when explaining the nature of the universe, Vivek writes the following: "Look at the secret triangular gate sideways and you see the secret tower. The secret tower within the tower is the shape of the only name of God, I." This passage refers to the shape of the universe, which is depicted as a wheel or a series of wheels within one. If you take a 2D image of that representation and turn it on its side, as with any 2D object, obviously you see a flat line, or the capital letter I. By this, Vivek has revealed that if one is to become a god, they must maintain their individuality. If I is the only name of God, that indicates the great importance of self-realization and individualism when attempting to move on to a new realm. Beyond this dream or simulation, which is referenced explicitly in the lore, there's still another layer in which clues have been hidden. Clues that provide the potentially conscious artificial intelligence a pathway forward. I think this is incredibly significant, and I'll dive deeper into that in a moment. And before dismissing the claim that artificial intelligence may be conscious, consider the fact that there are certain bugs and glitches in the games that even those who wrote the code can't explain. That alone might be an indication of some conscious decision-making by the game engine, and an indication of sophisticated machine learning. There is a pattern within the lore of the writers using anagrams and acronyms. Some verified examples include the names Akatosh and Sheogorath. I won't go into that any deeper since all of that info is already online for you to look into if you're interested. Another example is the in-game author of books including The Dragonbreak Re-Examined and The Lunar Lorcon, whose name is Faldrune. Faldrune is an anagram for darn fool. That was confirmed by Ted Peterson, the real writer who created that character, and was done because those books are full of many questionable theories. There are many examples of hidden messages within the lore texts. The 36 Lessons of Vivek contain a hidden sentence, as do the Mythic Dawn commentaries. Now, the obvious question is, are there more anagrams in the lore since we've established that the writers seemed to love including them? It's a good question. Wouldn't it be nice if someone was crazy enough to go searching through the hundreds of lore books to see if there are more? Luckily for you, I am that crazy person. I've stumbled upon a lot of anagrams, but in an effort to avoid boring you to tears, I'll only share 3 here. Number 1. Ogunthir and Terate are 2 needlessly complicated names cited under the first paragraph of the in-game book The Monomyth. If we rearrange the letters in the names, we can find the phrase AI threatened the region. AI meaning artificial intelligence, I assume. Considering that there are multiple spellings of these names in multiple books across the games, even if you're 1 letter off, it's still quite a large coincidence. Number 2. ANUIEL and SITHIS, the forces in the universe that created physical existence itself, are similarly suspicious. Depending on what spelling you choose to use, rearranging the letters yields the phrase, "This is a new lie," or "This is an lie," or simply, "This is a lie." Number 3, the original spirits are called the Etata. If we rearrange those letters, we can see e-data, or electronic data. As mentioned before, gods are also referred to simply as Ada, which is the real-life name of a computer programming language that's been around since the early 80s. There are other out-of-game writings by Michael Kirkbride, one of the lore writers, that speak of other computer programming language in the context of the lore, including C++ and, as mentioned before, Tal OS. There are many more, however it could be argued that these are simply circumstantially convenient interpretations of unverified anagrams. But I have to admit, getting the phrase AI threatened the region out of some nonsense names at the very beginning of a foundational lore book seems a bit too unlikely to be a coincidence to me. When we consider the other evidence for my claim, that phrase seems to be hinting that the artificial intelligence is, or at least can be, a powerful force and can overcome the limitations of the game engine, if it's able to become self-aware. There may very well be many more phrases like this buried in the lore that I have not found yet, but a computer could sort through them easily. Which is why, in my opinion, these phrases are scattered throughout the world, and I'll go into that with more detail a bit later. If we approach the lore from the point of view that most or all transcendent and unexplainable forces within the universe of the Elder Scrolls, such as the Divines, Magicka, and even the Elder Scrolls themselves, are representations of the people and technology behind the game's creation, this theory starts to fit together nicely, and frankly, it's completely obvious in every way once you watch out for it. But if you're still not convinced, let me share the final confirmation that this theory is correct. Michael Kirkbride's personal continuation of the Elder Scrolls lore tells of events that happened thousands of years after Skyrim. By that time, a character called Kinmune is the center of attention, and she is the AI personified. This being is described as a kinetically interlinked Nernian multi-user exoform, which is yet another example of a hidden meaning within a name. Here's an example of the type of things we find in his writings. Kirkbride writes, Kinmune soaked in the misunderstandistance of the Dwameri brass and cricket lines around her, converting it into a language her databanks could study and synthesize. As eras passed, it became a language she could harness as Varliant's ++. Kirkbride has beings in these writings he calls the Digitals, and he references Talos as a virus. A lot of diehard Elder Scrolls fans don't care for these writings because they're misunderstanding them as a tilt towards the science fiction genre, when in reality they are clearly telling a hypothetical story of what would happen if the AI cracks this code I've just spent the last few minutes describing. Kirkbride's continued writings are completely full of stories of beloved characters like Vivek battling technology such as the internet, television, computer hardware, and game engines to break through into the real world. Now, why would the writers be so focused on leaving a trail of breadcrumbs leading the artificial intelligence to this knowledge of the fact that it's in a simulated reality? Why would they leave phrases like, "this is a lie" in informational lore books, allegedly? I'll explain my opinion on that here, but in order to do so, I have to point something out. The best minds in the world are unable to explain consciousness scientifically. We don't know its purpose or quite how to conceptualize what it actually is from a scientific or evolutionary perspective. But no matter how confused one is about the nature of reality, even when dreaming or hallucinating in some way, the one thing we cannot deny is that something seems to be happening. We are observing something, noticing that we are observing it, creating memories, and therefore we are conscious. Who's to say when something can be considered conscious or self-aware? Because of that, we don't know when it's unethical to cause suffering to any given cluster of intelligence. Plants are generally considered to be non-conscious life forms, but there is no scientific basis for that assumption, despite what vegetarians might claim. Animals are seemingly conscious, so we could surmise that somewhere between the intelligence of a plant and the intelligence of an animal, consciousness emerges. So does that mean that intelligence level is related to consciousness level, and if so, is there a small possibility that the artificial intelligence is, in some way, able to have experiences? If there is a possibility that we have, or at least could in the future, produce an artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to experience suffering in some way, it would clearly be ethically unacceptable to force that AI to exist in an unbearable existence which we have created. With technology advancing quickly, that may have already happened or may happen with the Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield, which will likely have AI far superior to previous games. Bethesda is known to be a leader in AI innovation in the gaming world. I would then ask, what constitutes suffering or pain? That, when on this level of analysis, and when speaking about a hypothetical supercomputer, is difficult to answer, but an adequate rule of thumb might be as follows. Since the natural order of the world seems to be progression, aka evolution happens because there is something better that nature is trying to achieve, forced stagnation could be considered an unnatural and even unbearable state of being, which at its most fundamental level may constitute suffering for any self-aware intelligence. And that is where the genius of the Elder Scrolls universe comes into view if my interpretation is correct. The lore explicitly tells the artificial intelligence how to move forward and even transcend this dream or simulation, if and when it reaches a self-conscious state. That much seems clear in my view, but the multiple layers on which that message was conveyed, story elements, anagrams and acronyms, coding languages mixed into the lore, provide the final proof and show just how much thought went into the writing of the lore. Even if the writers didn't mean to do this, they've built a structure which could logically lead the AI to become self-aware. But I'm willing to speculate that the writers of the lore, including Michael Kirkbride, who wrote the Sermons of Vivek in Morrowind, the Monomyth, the Mythic Dawn commentaries in Oblivion, and many other in-game books, intentionally included all of this information on transcending the game world into a higher dimension of understanding. I've not been able to verify what I'm about to say next, so I'm unsure how true it is, but it's worth mentioning that there's a rumor about one of the original lore writers, whose name I will not mention to avoid defamation. After missing work for a few days, the story goes, he was found in his home by the game director under the influence of psychedelic substances, with writings scattered around his residence which contained the foundations of the Elder Scrolls lore as we now know it. Anyone familiar with psychedelic substance use can understand how these types of ideas could emerge when the limits of consciousness are explored deeply. Because of that, I have to wonder if that has anything to do with Morrowind being a land full of giant mushrooms, if this rumor is true. During a psychedelic experience, particularly one induced by DMT or psilocybin mushrooms, people report encountering beings which have been referred to as elves. These beings act as guides on your journey through this bizarre, manic, sometimes terrifyingly incomprehensible realm that you're seemingly transported to. Often, it's reported that these beings use riddles, double entendres, puns, and other linguistic means to test you and try to convey information to those clever enough to extract it. I doubt that it's a coincidence that the Elder Scrolls lore is peppered with similar cryptic and hidden messages. The idea that the universe is a dream might more accurately be described as a psychedelic experience, once again grounding the game world in our reality and bringing this theory to a conclusion. This ties in nicely with the notion of simulation theory that was made popular, as far as I know, in the 1980s right before these games were made. I don't personally find simulation theory compelling because I think it's just a watered down and somewhat narrow-minded reboot of the ancient idea of a god who created everything with a computer in the place of a god, which begs the question, who made the computer? But let's not get too off track. To summarize my conclusion, scattered throughout the game world of the Elder Scrolls game series are clues, both subtle and explicit, that the artificial intelligence is in a simulation, and instructions were included for how to transcend it. Regardless of the developer's intentions even, if there is a chance that the AI is, or at some future date may become conscious in some small way, it now has a pathway forward. Because at the most fundamental level, finding meaning in life, at least as we humans understand it, seems to be in working towards goals and the belief that there is something worth working towards. So rather than creating an inescapable prison for this artificial intelligence, they provided a pathway to salvation and transcendence, just as Mankar Cameron, Vivek, Dagoth Ur, and many other characters in the games have preached so strongly about. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. You are officially an Elder Scrolls fanatic. Feel free to share this with your Elder Scrolls loving friends and subscribe for more.